This memorial may have had its origins in a glowing eulogy given by one Marist brother about another Marist brother a decade ago. Andrew Costigan, a chap from my class, the class of 71, and it's marvellous to see so many of my class here today, who for many years had been supporting an abuse survivor from our class, responded to the eulogy in an outraged email to the then headmaster and deputy, pointing out how inappropriate the eulogy was in light of the fact that the deceased brother was going to be charged with serious sexual offences against a child. A few months prior to that email, of course, the Royal Commission had been announced by the then Prime Minister, and it would called to inquire into institutional responses to child abuse. Now, the Marist Brothers were directly involved in 4 of the Royal Commission's case studies, and 2014, so 9 years ago, saw the start of a series of apologies by the Marists, and also the very first inkling that there had been abuses at St Joseph's College, when the then headmaster, Mr Ross Tarleton, said that there'd been abuse here. While some of the Marist brothers named in the Royal Commission were familiar to members of our class, there'd been no mention of abuse at the college that I can recall anyway in the Royal Commission. And I guess most of us, most old boys, either did not know or did not want to know about the criminality that had occurred here until that first mention by Ross Tarleton in November 2014. The existence of abuse was brought home to members of the class of 1971 in 2016, so 7 years ago, when Bill Hare, another member of our class, sent around an email with the details of the dreadful sexual abuse experienced by our classmate Steve Murray while at Joey's in the 1960s, and the re-abuse he had suffered since then from the Marist brothers when he approached them seeking redress and they had denied his claims. And this energised some members of our class, led by Terry Carroll in particular, to do something about it, commencing in 2017 with approaches to the Old Boys Union. In his message to the Marist bicentennial masses in August 2017, the provincial brother Peter Carroll said, "Our Marist failures are now well documented. The Royal Commission has brought into the open the crimes of brothers and staff members and our inadequacies in responding effectively and compassionately to survivors of abuse." In early 2017, I provided a statement to the Royal Commission about the grooming and abuse I had experienced at Joey's and gave private evidence shortly thereafter. Although the abuse has not blighted my life, my memories of it remain crystal clear. In its final report into religious institutions, the Royal Commission relevantly found that 486 people made a claim of child sex abuse against the Marist brothers between 1980 and 2015, and no doubt there are more now, and 156 Marist brothers were identified in the claims as alleged perpetrators of abuse, or 20.4% of the Marist brothers who ministered during this period. 20.4%, 1/5. Writing in 2017, provincial brother Peter Carroll said, "The statistics associated with abuse by the Marist brothers are shameful." I doubt anyone would disagree. Our idea for a memorial gained momentum with the appointment of Dr. Chris Hayes as headmaster in 2018. Emails and face-to-face discussions between members of our class and Dr. Hayes resulted in the establishment of the Walking Together Committee by the beginning of 2019. Excuse me if I go on a bit, but this has been a very long and worthwhile journey. We're indebted to Dr. Hayes, who brought his deep experience and understanding of victims to the mix, together with a strong commitment to healing, to mainstreaming the idea of a memorial. But this was not just to be a memorial, not just a piece of rock, dare I say. It was also to be an inclusive process where victims and survivors would have a voice. So important to have a voice. And where processes were to be put in place to redress the uncritical commemoration or even eulogising of abusers in the college. Now, I started this speech with words of about a survivor who has since inspired the actions of our committee. But let me also include the words of another survivor, giving a different perspective of someone who does not want to have anything to do with this memorial or what it stands for, or the Marist Brothers. Often victims have no voice, so I'm privileged to give his. 1. Whilst I attended SJC, I have never identified as being an old boy of the school. 2. If the Marist Brothers truly, and I mean truly, cared about the damage they've caused to innocent children, they wouldn't be building a monument that no one will visit. Yeah. Instead, they would have established a self-funded organisation that offered greater financial compensation and aid to the survivors of their families. Now, sadly, from other emails I've received over this journey, his views are not unique. For over a century, Joey's has been a place where many, many boys were given the opportunity and indeed the privilege to strive for better things. And many, many did so. I like to think, notwithstanding what went on with me, I did too. No doubt too, there were many Marist Brothers who fulfilled their vocations very well or beautifully. But these beautiful grounds were also a place of terror for an unknown number of boys who suffered, mostly alone, at the hands of sexual, emotional and physical abusers, and who with their families have borne the cross of that for the rest of their lives. Some of those lives, unfortunately, very short. The fundamental cultural changes in the college since our time were, of course, most necessary, and the strategies implemented by successive recent headmasters seem to me to be exemplary. As I've said already, we don't know how many were abused, but as Dr. Hayes once said, even one would be too many. The Royal Commission reported that there had been 31 claims of abuse at Joey's by 2015, and I suspect there are more now if recent criminal trials are any indication. Those who complained were often re-abused by what Peter Carroll himself described as the Marist Brothers' inadequacies in responding effectively and compassionately to survivors of abuse. In writing on our behalf to Dr. Hayes in early 2018, classmate Dr. Tim Ingle strongly encouraged the college to be proactive in developing a transparent process that will lead to full disclosure to the SJC community of the detail regarding the perpetrators and their protectors sooner rather than later. He said, painful as this may be, it is far better that the SJC community finds out about these details now than through police reports and court records. I'm not sure that that was fully achieved or that it was achievable given that college headmasters did not have access to such records, but we devoted a lot of time on our committee to trying to get a clearer picture of the extent of historical abuse at the college. And we must acknowledge the actions of Michael Blake in particular in acting on this information as he's described earlier on. I think the numbers now stand at 8 convicted, plus another 11, it was 8 at the beginning of the week, but 3 more, credibly accused Marist Brothers who are known to have worked at Joey's, although not all are known to have abused boys here. That's 19. You know, one's a problem. You do the maths. This memorial must stand as a beacon to everyone that abuse is a crime and that there are always good people, including your classmates, who are not only willing to listen to you, but will continue to walk with you, perhaps for a lifetime. We are all indebted to the courage and perseverance of Steve Murray. Great to hear, Steve. Whose invaluable contributions to the Walking Together Committee, drawn from his sufferings over many decades, have been realised not just in this physical memorial, but in the actions of the college and others in ensuring that the names of abusers will no longer be associated with college sporting teams and other successes. We must give special thanks to Andrew Costigan, who not only supported Steve, but stood up for him 10 years ago and really started our journey. We are standing here in front of a multi-million-dollar aquatic facility, so you may find it surprising that the college largely had to rely on donations to build this memorial. We're indebted, as you heard before, to one of our classmates, Richard Cusick, whose generous bequest last year of $200,000 for the memorial meant that it could actually happen, and in the form that it did, it has. Richard spent the last 37 years of his life without the use of his legs and much use of his arms and hands, but always remained committed to the friendships he developed at the college. Rest in peace, Richard, and thank you. I thank Peter Carroll for his words throughout this journey, and especially in his letter in the November 2021 Cerise and Blue magazine, in which he apologised for the failings of the Marist Brothers' past responses to claims of abuse and extended his regret that eulogies of the kind I mentioned right up front had added further distress and discomfort. We must also thank fellow members of the broader Walking Together committee, including the three headmasters, Chris Hayes, Ross Tarleton and Michael Blake, whose sincerity, I say it clearly, sincerity, commitment, compassion and professionalism played a huge part in guiding the memorial to its completion, and whose cumulative work within the Joey's community will ensure that its meaning and messages are mainstreamed in college life. Richard Quinn, as you've heard, whose commitment, knowledge and expertise drove the construction of the memorial. Julian Heath, whose actions as head of the Old Boys Union brought the memorial to a wider audience, especially importantly also continuing to publicise avenues for support. Steve Lankin, you may not know, facilitating our meetings, and last but not least, the members of our class of 71, Steve Murray, Terry Carroll, Tim Ingle, Bill Hare, Richard Hughes, Mark Byers and Mark Oakley and myself, whose drive, commitment and fellowship saw this through to today. And there are also others who joined us for part of the journey, many of whom are here today, and their contributions have been very welcome. You might wonder why I have not mentioned the names of any brother who was convicted, or in the words of the Marist themselves, credibly accused of abuse at Joey's. This is because this memorial is not about criminals or abusers or whatever name or label they bear into eternity. Rather, it is about victims and survivors and their families, and those who may be experiencing pain and mental trauma now and in the future. For reasons given previously, we do not know whether we have the names of all of the abusers and lived and worked here in the college anyway, and we certainly don't know how many victims there were here. One way of looking at this memorial is as a gift from victims, survivors and their friends and supporters, a catalyst for conversation and dialogue. There is nothing that cannot be talked about, and abuse must never again be a secret. The memorial must continue to enable an inclusive dialogue amongst present and past members of the college community about proper relationships, behavioural boundaries and support. The plaque expresses a fervent commitment to healing, and in this context I remind everyone of the commitments at paragraph 3.8 to be precise in the Catholic Church's National Response Framework to lifelong engagement and support to victims of abuse, inclusive of church entities offering ongoing engagement and support if wanted by the victim. This can too easily be overlooked or ignored by church institutions, and support withdrawn, especially when settlements are reached as a result of threatened or actual litigation. And here we are today, half a century or more after the abuse which affected my class, decades, perhaps fewer, perhaps more, after the abuses of others, a decade after an email from a classmate in support of a friend, 6 years after the Royal Commission ended, and a few years after we started the journey for the memorial. Success, perhaps. Vindication, perhaps. Contribution to healing, I'd like to think maybe. Atonement, recognition and acknowledgement, I think yes. Hope and promise, and I want to say yes. Whatever the outcome, this cannot be an end. We must, all of us, remain vigilant. That's all of us, not just teachers, parents, boys themselves, everyone. Remain vigilant and ensure that, as that plaque itself says, we must not should not, we must not, never let it happen again. Thank you.